Good morning and welcome to another weekly update. There is loads to talk about this week, lots and lots of things. So why don't we just get right into it? So the first thing I want to talk about is some exciting news. The Elgato Stream Deck plugin, you probably already know about it. It released to much fanfare a few weeks ago. Then it was pulled from the Elgato plugin site due to a problem. But it is now back. But that isn't really what I want to talk about, because when it was first released, all the way back about a month ago, I wrote a blog post around it, kind of interestingly, about API support and what that meant for developers, because now we had a tool that could interact with Microsoft Teams on the client. It was a client SDK style interaction. So underlying that must be some sort of SDK, and I thought I'd go and have a look and see if I could figure it out and make it work. So that took some unexpected twists and turns, and in the process, I made some new friends at Microsoft, but all of which to say that led to the blog post I put out last week around a new Microsoft Teams client API, which is coming, but is not ready yet. So what you're seeing with the Stream Deck plugin is kind of that first iteration of that API, but it's only intended for the Stream Deck. It's not a generalized API. And obviously you could go and figure out how to use it, but it's going to change. So Microsoft are planning on making this a generally available API for developers to automate bits of the Teams client. And so that led to the blog post I put out last week, which is really kind of, yes, you could hack this around. You could try and figure out how it works under the hood and, the private API that's there at the moment and build your own stuff on it. But if I were you, I would wait, because Microsoft are coming out with their own thing. They are going to make this a kind of public documented API. And so between now and then, you could use it if you want, but stuff's going to break all the time because they're going to change it as it goes into this kind of making it public process. Those APIs always change because they go through like a standardization process. They go through a review. The names of things all change to kind of fall in line with existing standards, and all sorts of other things happen. So for all of those reasons, it is worth waiting. But right now, what we should be doing is getting excited about what this means and the different types of applications that we'll be able to build when it comes. What we don't know, and what would be is interesting to kind of think about right now, is what that is going to mean. Like, what support specifically, what features are developers going to be able to automate? Is it going to be limited to just what we see in the Stream Deck at the moment, which is things like turning your camera on and off, ending a meeting, mute and unmute and stuff like that? Or will it expand out to do other things? So it would be great to be able to answer or reject incoming calls. It would be great to be able to set presence. It would be nice to be able to change devices. All of these things that you could conceivably do with the Stream Deck, or with some third-party application, or in response to other things happening on your system. Lots and lots to look at there. And it's exciting, but we're just going to have to wait and see a little bit to see what's happening with this new API. So that's that blog post. I've got more details in the blog post. You can go check that out. But that was the first thing I wanted to tell you about. Yes, there's a new Microsoft Teams client API. No, it's not ready quite yet. All right, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about a new toolkit for Visual Studio Code, the Viva Connections toolkit that is now in preview. This was a blog post that Vesa Juvonen put out in the week. And this is kind of interesting because if you've done anything with Viva Connections, it's kind of totally okay to use as it is, but you at the moment you have to use the Yeoman generator, which is fine if you've used it before. I guess it can be a little bit intimidating if you haven't ever used it before, and it can be a barrier to entry. And if you want to kind of make any other changes, you've got to use the CLI as well. Basically, what this toolkit does is wrap some of that stuff up and abstract it and give it like a pretty Visual Studio add-in, which hopefully should lower the bar to entry for more developers. And make it easier for people to build Viva Connections experiences, which is great because Viva Connections experiences are really cool. I'm working on something at the moment, kind of just for me, around kind of smart home and energy usage and stuff like that I'm visualizing on a Viva Connections dashboard. Once I've finished it, I will write it all up because it's kind of interesting, but it's still very much a work in progress at the moment. But that's just one of the things I'm doing with Viva Connections, which is interesting. But this is cool to see. I think this will open things up and make it easier to use, for other people and for other developers. The whole blog post is in here. There's a nice video as well. You can go and download it because it's in preview. They want your feedback via the GitHub issue list. So lots to do there. So if you are already using Viva Connections or building Viva Connections experiences, go check out this toolkit because it will probably make your workflow slightly easier for kind of creating new projects and stuff like that. And if you've been waiting because it looked a bit complicated to get started, hopefully now it is less complicated. All right, next thing to talk about. So a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the Microsoft Teams App Camp that Microsoft ran, a virtual event that went down very well, was very good from all accounts. What they've done actually is taken all of those resources and packaged them into a kind of big downloadable set of assets for anyone who wants to run one of these app camps, which is really cool. So you can go and take the app camp in a box. And it comes with like a load of videos. It comes with a load of hands-on labs. I think this is a really nice idea. It's good to see. I'm interested in doing this. I'm kind of on the fence about wondering whether it's a good idea to take one to a conference and do like a workshop around it or something like that, which might be quite interesting to do. Yeah, I don't know. Let me know if you think that's a good idea. I think it'd be quite a good idea. But yeah, we'll have to see. All right, so that's that. You can go and get that. I'll put a link to the blog post where you can download it. But yeah, if you liked the app camp, or even if you missed the app camp and you want to do it on your own time, you can now get the app camp in a box to go and either consume yourself at your own pace and on your own time, or for delivery to others if you want to take it and represent it. That's cool too. All right, I'm going to keep going because there's just so many things to get through. So there's been a change to the Microsoft Graph callRecords API. And I think this is a change that will impact people. And it came courtesy of a blog post that looked like this, a very short blog post. And it talks about Microsoft's commitment to storing and process data for EU customers. But the big thing to be aware of is callRecords data, which gives you that on wrap up, gives you all that kind of information about the call, quality of the call, the people in the call, and all the rest of it. From February, that data is only going to be shown if you were the organizer of the meeting. Or you have people that join the meeting. So for organizations where you've got federated calls or meetings that your organization didn't initiate, so you've got staff and users joining other people's calls, you will only see usage and diagnostic data for your users. You won't see them for everyone else. You won't see everyone else in the list, and not even anonymized, and you won't get any of their call quality data. And that is not just an EU-US, that's not just an EU thing. It doesn't just count across the EU borders or the region. That is everyone across the board. So even if you've got 2 US companies and you've got users from one joining meeting from another, this rule is still going to apply. Now, I have mixed thoughts about this. Not about whether it's a good idea or not, or whether it should or shouldn't happen. I think it's fine to happen. I'm surprised it got rolled out into the 1.0 branch, like the GA branch, because in my mind, this is a breaking change. Now, I know that the schema of the API doesn't change. So on the face of it, your application won't break in terms of, it won't error. But I do feel logically a lot of people's applications will break because the data is very different now. So if you've got any kind of reporting, it's really going to dry up or it's going to be wrong if you don't take this into account. So I'm surprised that this got rolled out so quickly. But I guess legal changes tend to have that kind of effect. So this is definitely worth checking out if you have any code that runs against the callRecords API, if you do any kind of reporting on Microsoft Teams calls using that real-time API, then you want to check this out and make sure you're not impacted by this and kind of take steps if you are. Okay, what else have we got going on? It wouldn't be a weekly update without talking about, certainly from the last few weeks, without talking about AI and ChatGPT and all those sort of things. The one blog post I do want to bring to your attention about this is how it's going into the Power Platform, because I thought this was interesting. And a couple of places, we're at the stage where everything in Microsoft has to have AI in it, and everybody has to announce something that they're doing with AI. And this is kind of one of those, but there are some things coming. So we've got Conversation Booster in Microsoft Power Virtual Agents. Now, this sounds very much like Q&A Maker, but it might be more than that. I'm not quite sure. But the idea is you take your bot and you point it at something you've got internal, like an internal knowledge base or a website, and then you'll be able to answer questions based on that. Now, that sounds exactly like what Q&A Maker is. I'm not sure if it's new or not. I'm not sure whether it's been infused with newer ChatGPT style technology. But yeah, that's what that is. You can also create text with a GPT model. So you can basically, you've got like that kind of access to Azure OpenAI service and the ChatGPT model in a user-friendly interface when making things in Power Automate and Power Apps. So instead of having to call the APIs directly, you've got a nice wrapper around them. So I don't think they're huge announcements, but if you live in that world, they will make your life easier. It's interesting to see they're also publishing a kind of roadmap around what they're doing here. And what's coming. We've got some things here around, these things we talked about. I think they're at pains to show that they're on a journey here, and they've been doing this for a while, and it's not just all new stuff, which kind of makes sense. They have been doing some things in the past. You can go back a couple of years and see their innovations and see what they've been doing there. But yeah, it's interesting. So there's a whole blog post with details here about all of this and all the things you can do. But I'm not going to go through it just because we're going to kind of press on and talk about the next thing. But if that sounds interesting, go and check out that blog post if you're in the Power Platform world and you want to know what they're doing with next generation AI. Okay, something else to tell you about. We've only got 2 things left, don't worry. Like I say, it's a mega busy week. Surprising, really. There's a new API thing in Microsoft Graph. It's called the Industry Data API. The idea, I think, is to bring in data from outside of Microsoft Graph in a way that allows you to use it inside Microsoft Graph, or at the very least, it's a kind of ready-to-go ETL workflow for data that lives outside Microsoft Graph. The Industry Data API. It will combine data from various sources. It will move them into a single Azure data lake. It will normalize the data, and it will then export it in outbound flows. So the primary use case, I think, for right now is the education industry, specifically school roster information, which is in a very common format. And there's a whole thing called the Microsoft Schools Data Sync, which kind of works with this and works with this Industry Data API. However, if this is a problem you're trying to solve where you've got large amounts of data that's important to kind of how your business runs and how the logic of your applications at work and all that sort of stuff, and you want access to it, then this might be worth checking out to see if it's something you can do and see how specific it is to to education, and whether or not it's applicable to your industry if that's not education. And whether or not you can use it. There is a little bit of information here about it, but there's not loads. There is a whole, API reference. It's in beta at the moment. It does look like it's in public beta, so anyone can do it. So it's not locked down at all. Or what I will say though is that, as you can see, a lot of the documentation is quite specifically focused to education. This is one of those use cases where Microsoft have built this thing with one very specific vertical in mind. Now, it may work for you, but you may find rough edges where it's clearly been meant for education. So you're going to have to work around those, and you're not going to get an awful lot of support right now until they've broadened it out a little bit. So might work, might not. Maybe worth looking into if you're about to embark on some massive ETL project. Then it might be easier, cheaper, quicker, whatever, to do it through this approach. But yeah, worth checking out for sure. And finally, I'm going to leave you with one more thing before I go. and that is Microsoft Build, which is coming soon. So Microsoft Build is coming. They've announced the dates, May 23rd to 25th. It is a real conference, so it's going to be a mixture of in-person and hybrid, which is interesting and exciting and encouraging. We don't know any details really about sessions or anything like that yet. We have the kind of teaser page. We've got some details about the agenda and what's happening in person. Space is limited for certainly the pre-day workshops. Not sure about the build itself. I think it's being held at the Seattle Conference Center. It's happening in Seattle, which kind of reflects, I guess, a reluctance from Microsoft to kind of go for really, really big events. But having it in Seattle is good for them because obviously a lot of their staff are there, so they don't have to pay expensive travel and hotel costs. So that kind of makes sense. And it's probably good for the local economy and industry as well. So I think that's good. But what's important for many of us, I'm sure, because I'm certainly not planning on going. What's important is that it's also digital. I think this is going to be interesting to see what that mix looks like between in-person and digital. Will the in-personness degrade the digital experience, or where you've got a conference that's not optimized for digital, like the last couple of years of, say, Ignite and Built have been optimized for digital, and we've seen that almost to a fault, actually. Those kind of super carefully curated videos that were really presentations. They were like films rather than session presentations, right? They were so carefully edited. Will we see like a departure from that and going back to people in rooms of people standing up, and then we've got like a blurry cam at the back that is the global people watching? Honestly, I think I'd kind of prefer that because it's much more real. As long as you've got an engaged audience that's asking decent questions, and there's some affordance for being able to ask questions remotely, I think that would be really good. If anybody remembers Ignite 2019, that was a fully hybrid conference where every session was available online, and that was that experience. There were good cameras in all the rooms. It worked really, really well. Remote attendees had an advocate in the room to shout out questions as they came in. It was a process that really worked. And if we can get back to that, I'll be really happy. If we can get back to that, it's good to be there in person. And I think that I'm one of these people that thinks there always will be an advantage to being there in person if you can be, for the networking, for the ability to ask questions, and for all the kind of social experiences as well. So I'm very much an in-person kind of person. However, I know that's not possible all the time for everyone, and it's not going to be possible for me this year to go to Build. In fact, I've never been to Build, actually, which I should probably correct at some point. But the next best thing is, a hybrid conference, where, I can choose to attend any of these things, and it's almost as good as being in the room. So that's what I'm hoping for. We'll have to look forward to it. It's at the end of May. There are some other things happening at the end of May, so it is going to stomp over some other conferences, which is unfortunate, but we're just going to have to be pretty good at watching everything on demand. But we'll see how it goes. All right, I think that's everything for me. Have a great week, whatever it is you're doing. I hope it's not as busy as the week Microsoft just had. But whatever it is you're doing, have a great one, and I will speak to you again next time.